Okay, our next happening is the AgTech applications for Hawaii in the tropics, and this is going to be a panel discussion. Up here on the stage, we're going to have the four previous speakers. Well, actually, we'll have two of the speakers live, and then Dr. Ku and Arama will be virtual, but they're going to participate in this conversation. And coordinating that will be Ryan Ozawa. Ryan is the co-founder and CEO of Smart Yields, which is a Hawaii-based ag-tech startup that makes precision agriculture accessible to small and medium-sized independent farms. Ryan is also an independent journalist and a veteran of the Hawaii tech and startup scene, and he currently publishes a Facebook-funded Hawaii Bulletin. An unabashed lifelong geek, Ryan is the proud father of three, and he holds a degree in journalism from the University of Hawaii. So the other folks that are going to be on this panel are, of course, David Slaughter and Shusan, and then the two folks that are coming in virtual, Dr. Ku and Arma. So this is going to be very interesting, and kudos to the tech folks to make this all work. We'll see how it goes. But anyways, gentlemen, please come up. Thank you very much, and take your seats over there. Great. Thank you. Hi, Ryan. Thank you. Thank you. And so Ryan is going to coordinate this, and we're taking questions from the audience. There were already a bunch from the earlier sessions that we skipped because of time, and they're going to be channeled to Ryan through that Google form method. So if you have any questions for these guys, go to that Google form, and you can direct it to either to the panel in general or to the individuals that you want to specifically address the question to. So with that, take it away, Ryan.
Thank you. Whoop. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the coffee, by the way. That helps quite a bit. It's an honor to be here. I'm with Smart Yields. I also should shout out the USDA Agriculture Research Station and all their great work here in Hilo, which Smart Yields is also helping with, and also doing a project with CTAR on the mental health of farmers, which I think, especially given our time, is actually something that deserves attention. So there's a poster outside of the theater that you can scan a QR code and take a survey that would help us quite a bit. But it is an honor to be here, and I don't want to waste too much time because we have a number of questions. The best part of a conference is an engaged audience, and I am glad to have over a dozen questions already queued. So I think I want to start with a general question for the panel. You know, we've talked about a lot of specific approaches, everything from what's happening in the area of research to practical commercial applications that NEC is very impressively doing around the world, and most recently indoor farming, which is revolutionary and important for urban communities. But I think a lot of people have had a similar question about cost and accessibility. So I was wondering if we could start with maybe your thoughts on where the entry point is for those small to medium-sized farm holders, 3 to 5 acres. I mean, they can imagine wanting to do satellite imagery or flying drones over their property, but they might not be at that point yet in their technological journey. So maybe Dr. Slaughter, if you can start, where would someone find the biggest bang for the buck if they're in the audience or they're watching? They're already committed to the understanding that technology can help them, but where is that first step, do you think? Where can they get the most for their first investment?
Yes, I think that unlike the ag tech of the past, that the economic models are quite a bit different. So you might not have the money to, we have a $100,000 drone that can take 5mm LiDAR data. But one of the new things that's happening, of course, is that there are a lot of service models available, and so being able to purchase information or purchase services is really one of the things that's changing a lot. So Blue River was a startup that was in California developing a robotic machine for doing thinning and weeding in lettuce, and so we're all familiar with our cell phones or our computers having to be updated quite regularly, right? And speakers have talked about the fact that the technology is changing so quickly. It's quite beneficial in maybe the cost profile coming down. But Blue River recognized that a couple of things. One is that a lot of the current people in farming may not be fully up to speed on the latest and greatest issues with AI or automation, but also that the technology was moving so quickly. So really the service model may be quite much more appropriate. And so they were basically pricing their product on a per acre basis. And so I think it's kind of like the co-op model of the past. It's essentially this idea of sharing. So that's one element. A lot of the irrigation technology is actually fairly inexpensive. So in terms of irrigation control, a lot of the sensing technology, when you talk about like soil sensing, a lot of that's pretty robust and been around a long time. So that's an entry point as well. And then a number of the companies, Yamaha, Honda, and so forth, are at advanced stages in autonomous ATV type vehicles. And so you can see some promotional material on that. So I think one of the low-hanging fruit may also be spray technology that you will see in terms of outdoor ag, that element is being.
Excellent. So Shu, our app, if we had $1 billion, would do what your crop app does. It was very impressive. So I guess similar to you, your company has such a broad tool set. Where do you see that interface with an individual farmer? Like David said, maybe a SaaS model, a subscription service, or maybe a service provider in the middle. But how do you get from your crop app to a small farm?
So the most biggest investment for farmers is maybe a smartphone. It's around $1,000 US. And now with CropScope, they're providing a service that the only monitoring is maybe around the $10 US for year per hectare. So the monthly $1 or something. Yeah. And we can use the satellites. So if you use Sentinel, that's a 10-meter resolution. That's free of charge we can get by the directory. But it is difficult to understand. But Europe provides a Sentinel satellite free of charge. But we are using a 3-meter or 4-meter resolution.
Wow.
Yeah, but it takes only the satellites. It takes $2 to $3 US per year. That's very low cost. We can use the technology because now we are using software and almost all the information from the cloud. So if they don't use the hardware or equipment, we can affordable to install them.
Do you have service providers or middleware people who can help make that connection to help them? Is that part of your business model as well, like maybe a local part? I saw coffee, the USDA doing a lot of work on coffee. Do you have people who will be able to translate from the satellite to the farm for them?
Yes, that is very important. So almost all farmers, for the farmers, it is difficult to catch up the advanced technology. So for us, it's important to translate the technology to the very reasonable understanding.
Excellent. Maybe Arama, if you're available. You, I think, really focus specifically on the advancement of indoor farming, and certainly from Honolulu, you can see the need for maybe using urban spaces. But again, when we're looking at perhaps cost concerns, do you see an applicability of solutions like yours for smaller farm holders? Like, for example, if they have a 3-acre farm, have you done cost comparisons between running that as an outdoor ag operation versus putting a large indoor facility on that same space?
Yeah, I think, Ryan, firstly, I think Minister is investing in actually a really wide range for the last 15 years of technology. So I'm actually also chairman of CropX, a company which was started in Israel and New Zealand that also does farm management solutions. You may have seen them. We've probably got, 22 countries, including smallholder farmers, using the technology, including here in New Zealand. Smallholder farming, I think, and large-scale indoor are really two very different topics. If you look at the facility in Compton, we're capable of producing 300 acres on a half-acre location from a scaling standpoint. So, and it's very capital intensive and pretty high tech to run and operate one of those facilities. All that said, I think what is interesting, and I think Dr. Slaughter touched on this as well, is the growth of services-based solutions which are applicable to smallholder settings, with really pretty sophisticated recommendations that can be driven through one smartphone. And we're seeing that, I think, become this digitization of farming become actually much more ubiquitous and frankly accessible in a way that's much more equitable than it perhaps was at the start of the digital revolution in farming 15, 20 years ago. From a standpoint of thinking about indoor agriculture, of course, hydroponics applications have been used pretty extensively. It's more affordable than sort of a vertical farming solution like ours, which is really frankly very high tech and looks more in some respects like really capital intensive manufacturing for large scale. All that said, I actually expect the cost curve for these technologies to come down, much like the first sequence of a human genome was $2.25 billion, and now we do it for pennies or dollars at least on 23andMe. In fact, the cost curve reduction is about 10 to the power of 6 on those technologies, and I expect to see similar cost curve reductions in indoor agriculture. Not overnight, but that was my point on the talk. The investment's been made to drive unit economic costs down. I'm pretty confident it's going to happen.
So patience and time is certainly going to help. Now, Dr. Koo, I think you more than anyone have focused specifically on the accessibility, equity, affordability of some of these solutions. Smart Yields was in the first accelerator out of the Vatican when they were looking for a way to focus on the UN sustainability goals and really thinking globally about these things. And sometimes it can be intimidating when you're a small farm holder. What would your recommendation be when someone says, well, I'm attending this conference, I'm curious to see what the state of the art is, and it's very exciting, but now with my small farm, what do I do first?
Sure, I'd say you've got a bunch of options. One, sometimes, especially for some of the newer technologies, which are still in early demonstration phase, they're looking for early adopting farmers who could get the technologies at a discount. So you could potentially work with them as a demonstration site to get the technology used in your specific case. If they're a little bit further along, they're an advanced company who's at scale, it's probably going to be somewhat difficult to do that. But what you can also do, and we see this a lot in developing countries, is if you can band a group of farmers together for some technologies that may be slightly more expensive, you can probably get a bulk discount from some of the companies. So you can, the companies, if you make it worth their while, that rather than selling 1 or 2, they're going to sell 30 or 40, they may be willing to give you a discount. In addition, depending upon where you are, you sometimes can get loans from local government or from regional governments who are trying to support farmers. And they can sometimes even be low or no interest loans, such that then you could be able to support the technology on farm. And then finally, sometimes you can get leasing or lease to own deals from some of the different technology companies that where it's actually a manufactured product, or you can get subscription deals if you do a longer subscription if it's a service model.
Thank you. And I think on that, I'll jump to one of our questions from the audience. This is for Dr. Watanabe, Watanabe-san. On that front, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious to what degree public subsidies play a role in enabling farmers to adopt these technologies in Japan at a higher or faster rate than in the US, OECD, and other developing markets. So can you talk specifically, again, on to what Dr. Ku mentioned, what role does the public sector, does the government play in making these things accessible?
In Japan?
Yes, in Japan.
So in Japan, actually, so the point of view on the national food security, the Japanese government so allocated many subsidy to the farmers to install the farming machinery and also this kind of technologies, and also sometimes in the especially in the sugar or wheat or some potato or something. So we need to secure the, and that cost of the production is maybe double to the 5 times to higher than to import the, for example, sugarcane from the Brazil. But it's still, we need to keep the products. So that the gap of the cost, the subsidy to the farmers, actually. And also, we have lots of very small farmers. So the government enhanced to use some technology to increase the productivity. Yeah, so that's we're using.
So would you say it's a critical part, like you could not do it without government?
Yeah.
Question for Dr. Slaughter. And I think it was our friends at the, who mentioned that ideas aren't the missing resource, it's resources and talent, right? We have many innovative ideas. So I had it right here. How do we transform the workforce? How do we get to that side? How do you get more youths into agriculture? Does technological innovation in the agricultural sector encourage younger workers to pursue agricultural careers because they see perhaps cool technology now happening in farming?
Yes, I think this is an area that we're kind of behind on. A lot of startups and a lot of activity. But in California, we have an extensive 4-H program, for example, and we really need to try to reach out to people, in grade school, and to go in and give them hands-on, so teach them about tissue culture and about biotechnology, and teach them about robotics and all of these things. And a lot of the families that are historic, farming. Labor families are antagonistic about having their children go into agriculture because they don't see these as high-paying jobs, right? And so what we need to do is really promote and make available STEM-based job opportunities in agriculture, and to get into these, California will be in the Central Valley, going in and engaging young people, 4th grade, 6th grade, try to get them involved, give them opportunities to really experience, the high-tech side of agriculture and see that there are these career potentials. And so I think that's a key issue. So, the question is dead on. We're behind on this, but it's going to be critical to our future to really excite young people about how agriculture will be exciting. And you're going to be managing tractors remotely right? You're not going to be, it's not going to be a career as a tractor driver, right? So it's really going to be a very different environment.
Yeah, you get to wear a Facebook Meta helmet and drive your tractor from your living room, maybe.
Right.
Dr. Koo, I mean, what do you see in terms of successful programs for, again, the workforce development, for, as great as these technologies are, finding the humans that are still necessary for success in these programs?
Sure. So I've seen it done a few ways. One is workforce training programs that we all talked about. Sometimes companies will bring in young people as early adopters when they go out and do their training for farmers, because sometimes they can hire young people who pick up the technology and adopt it quicker, and then they can use them as trainers to go out with farmers that aren't so used to the technology, folks who are middle to later stages of the farming lifespan and life cycle. So I'd say that's one way. Another way is demo days, demonstrations, how-to days. What I've seen a lot, especially in Africa, is mobile apps with like a farmer can just ask a question. Basically, they just type in, either on old SMS phones, they just type in their question. And now there's AI, which can answer half the questions that the farmers are asking about the technology. And other times, if it can't be answered by the AI, then it goes on to a human operator. And then if that doesn't work, then they have remote agents who can go out and help and train. And I think those are all ways which farmers directly are using these different technologies. But the easiest way is to have simple, easy to use technologies, which makes it easier for farmers to adopt early. And also makes it easier for young people to use it. What we're seeing in West Africa is half of the mobile technologies are actually used by the young people in the houses, and they just train their parents on how to use it.
That's probably how it happens in households everywhere. Hawaii has a reasonably growing program of school farms, farms on schools, recently passing a law that encourages that school meals include locally produced food, including the produce that come out of the school. So I think that certainly helps. So we have a question for Arama about indoor farming. It could solve a lot of problems related to even the exploitation of people and animals in the food system and be more sustainable in the long term. But does relying on so much on advanced precision tech also make our food supply more vulnerable to supply chain disruptions and lead to, say, the consolidation of money in agriculture?
Yeah, it's a great question, but no, I think the opposite is actually the case. We think about the basic agronomy formula of GEM, genetics, environment management, and farming. My family have been farming for generations here. The environment is the least controllable variable, right? So we, in fact, have invested heavily in genetics to be adapted to the environment. We have invested in management, including some of the techniques that are very damaging, like flood irrigation, for example, over reliance on NPK from mining and/or from sources derived from fossil fuels that are key cornerstones to industrial agriculture. That really is the main way of producing food today. Take the environment out of it, and you have massively more control around everything from genetic expression through to, for example, in the case of cultivated meat, producing meat without enteric fermentation on methane emissions, so which are massively damaging. And New Zealand scientists actually discovered methanogens less than 10 years ago. So we didn't even know what the mode of action was that was causing methane emissions from cattle. We now know it's a massive, massive problem with respect to outdoor agriculture. So look, I don't think outdoor agriculture, by the way, I'm not advocating for the end of outdoor agriculture, quite the opposite. I've invested in more than 40 companies in the space, but I think we need alternative solutions, and indoor production is part of that. And as to concentration of wealth in agriculture, well, what do you think you got today? That's how we've got to industrialize production. That's why 60% of land in the United States is leased. Farmers are getting bigger. So that's already happened. And dare I say it, the US predicted subsidies generated through the farm lobby, which increases industrialization of ag. I'm not a fan of that. at all. I would say that there's significant policy reform required as well. And I go back to my earlier comment, I'm not convinced about the efforts to arrest climate change, either in public policy or simply even amongst farmers, who understandably are not excited about taking a lot of pain in the form of either taxation or carbon payments. So these are complex, difficult problems. I think my final comment on this is we need to get our arms around all the tools we can get. And technology, whether it's outdoor farming or indoor, is going to be critical to the future of sustainability.
Thank you. We have a number of questions about what you just mentioned, kind of significant policy reform, and I think it also goes back to what government can do or get out of the way to allow things to proceed. So, Dr. Slaughter, if you work or you're operating in a region that is unfamiliar with a lot of these technologies, but you do need to engage policymakers, governments, and legislators in clearing the way for these technologies to help increase sustainability and food security. What do you think is the greatest challenge, the greatest barrier that your research or even users of your technology face from the government standpoint?
Well, the example that I'm most familiar with was at UC Davis, where we were working with the idea of drone delivery, and the government is essentially viewing it as the potential for essentially bombing, right? Yeah. So essentially, even dropping water from a drone was a significant hurdle. So the whole, a lot of times technology is so different, or it requires a real rethinking of your entire approach, and so you can run into kind of some surprising things. I hadn't really thought about that being a huge hurdle. So it took a long time for us to get clearance just to be able to drop water droplets from drones. So you can get into these regulatory environments, and Amazon with their package delivery is going through some of the same things in the other domestic arena. So that certainly is one area where policy is there. There can be certainly some policy encouragements that would, we have a lot of regulation around pesticide use, but not a lot of policy around encouraging, say, robotics as an alternative to non-chemical approaches. And the indoor vertical farming didn't really mention it as much, but one of the huge advantages is you have a closed system, and so if you can keep that clean, like you would have with a chip-making system, you often don't need pesticides inside because you have such a pure system. And so, if we are looking at trying to be environmentally sustainable, really looking at it, kind of this idea of food security that the Japanese are talking about, really thinking about what are our goals as a society, and the government might be thinking about subsidizing or encouraging adoption of these technologies because they can have these environmental advantages, or they can address key issues like labor shortages and so forth.
Definitely focusing on those fundamental human challenges, community challenges versus drones are scary, I think helps a lot. So, Shu, do you have the full-throated support of the Japanese government to do everything that you do? Is there any point of friction where Japanese government is unsure or resistant to what you're trying to accomplish?
Actually, the Japanese government is trying to help the farmers and some industries. So, but apart from the Japanese government, so I want to show some use case. And so we are collaborating with the UN in Indian spice market, and also we are collaborating in Vietnam coffee industry. And in that site. So we are monitoring the small farmers' activities that we record, for example, the chemical spray or fertilizer applied. And we're using a blockchain to secure some data to the Indian wholesale, how can I say, the wholesale market, to the data. And after this, almost all the spice export to the foreign countries. In that case, the buyer can assure that the spice is farmed such a secured place. And also the in Vietnam coffee, maybe a little bit same, but we don't use a blockchain, but we are collaborating with some certification program. So we record some records, and some certification organization certificated they're using some record. Yeah, that's so we can help to the small farmers. Yeah.
So even there, you have the government support.
Yes.
Yeah, blockchain is exciting for sure to be used for food traceability, I guess, and authenticity. I think Hawaii recently, we have the Hawaii Coffee Farmers Association, and they're going to be doing not nuclear, but very specific analysis to be able to verify that Kona coffee is Kona coffee, because right now, 10 times more Kona coffee gets sold than is made, so something's wrong. But fascinating. Dr. Koo, I mean, certainly from your global scope, I'd be curious what you would say we have policymakers, legislators in the audience at the state level, but if you could have time in the halls of government to bend the ear of a policymaker, what would you stress to them they could do to help through policy to help food sustainability through technology?
Well, I'd say number one is create flexible systems that will be able to pivot and grow to address the changes in technology. Often what we find, not just in developing countries, in the US as well, technology standards or industry standards will have been created for 20 years. The technology is radically changed or altered, and the standards don't keep up with the technology. And so it inhibits the growth and scale of new technologies that sometimes are more beneficial, environmentally friendly, and more efficient than those that already exist. I think so. And then having expert panels that are helping the lawmakers in that space, so that they can turn to someone who has expertise there, rather than trying to legislate in a topic they don't fully understand, will help them address that and potentially update standards every couple of years to keep up with the changes in technology, so that it continues to help us address the food security needs, both of Hawaii and in general.
Excellent. And I think, Arama, you kind of touched on this in terms of indoor farming being a controlled space. So a lot of even what we have struggles with here in Hawaii is outdoor spraying and pesticides, and perhaps spreading of that or experimental crops to nearby areas. Do you see indoor farming as one approach to help address policymaker concerns in AgTech?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. It already is receiving a lot of attention. I mean, there are efforts around the controlled environment space to work in programs through, for example, the Farm Bill. To your point, though, and I think Dr. Slaughter touched on this, indoor ag through environmental control doesn't require the level of either fertilization or crop protection products. And in fact, at Plenty, we use zero pesticides. Our products, in fact, we don't actually have to wash products, which means they actually have longer shelf life, less waste, better nutrition, etc. So yeah, I think those are all quick points. I also think just one thing I would add to this is the rise of looking at microbiome and biological products, both indoors. So we use beneficial microbes, but also in the soil systems as well, especially around regenerative agriculture. I haven't heard that come up yet, but I think outdoor agricultural systems, bringing animal and crop production systems together with a focus on soil health, is going to be incredibly important. And it's actually, I think, along with digital and robotics, one of the other really fruitful areas for smallholder farmers to receive benefit.
Thank you. Question for Dr. Slaughter, although I think everybody could probably have a take on that. Do you think that the adoption of AgTech is accelerating the practice of monocropping? We're iterating and optimizing systems to produce the best crop with the least resources, but are we losing opportunities for diversification, which is important, or diminishing the health of the ecosystem over the long run? Where is AgTech's role in promoting polyculture, growing multiple crops in a specific region?
Yeah, so in terms of low-hanging fruit, and as an engineer in automation, obviously if everything's identical, the automation is easy. So in terms of, or easier, and so there certainly is incentive and motivation to have uniformity and address that. But I think that as the technology evolves, there'll be opportunities for dealing with diversity. So, as you focus in on a particular, certainly a particular crop, so tomato, for example, you narrow down the knowledge space. So if you're trying to build a robot that does weeding, and you're just trying to recognize the difference between a tomato plant and all the weeds, that's a much easier task than if you open it all up to all vegetable crops. And so you're going to see early adoption of some technologies be more successful in a monocrop environment. But I think you also will see opportunities, agvoltaics is an example where you would bring in solar and ag production in a cropping system. I think it was where you talked about sugarcane and pineapple, that kind of concept is there. And then as we advance our data models and our machine learning understanding, I think the AI will be able to handle more diversity over time. So I think it's maybe a temporary early adoption aspect. I don't see the technology long-term being limiting on that aspect. You'll have still efficiencies of scale and and so forth that the reasons why we have monocropping already exist will continue. There'll be the same kind of motivations for doing that, especially if you're trying to feed 10 billion people. So
right.
So I think it is a challenge, but certainly trying to bring in genetic diversity in tomato and other things is not really a limitation, I don't see.
It makes sense. I mean, again, when you're trying to feed the 10 billion people, it would be great if you're really good at making coffee, but you can't live on coffee. So that certainly makes sense. And actually, Arama, this was a question for Dr. Slaughter, but I would imagine that indoor farming allows for a greater amount. Is this true of what you're growing in a space in terms of you could have 10 different crops within a facility?
That's the plan, yeah. Today we do leafy greens, strawberries in partnership with Driscoll's. And also we've been developing our own snacking and cherry tomatoes. We have inbred lines on that front. But we have a research facility in Wyoming. We've screened more than 1,000 cultivars. So we have both genotype markers and phenotype, very large data libraries that are enabling us to essentially bring these new crops to commercial production. So we haven't found anything we can't grow yet. We've actually been growing stone fruits. We've been growing apples, grapes, still in experimental format, but we're focused on bringing those three big crops to market first, probably for some of the reasons I mentioned. That said, I'm hoping one of the outcomes, it's probably for a follow-up after this, is on what tropical crops could be adapted. I know that between CITAR and Manoa University, there's a ton of really valuable knowledge being developed, or has been developed over decades on tropical crop development. So that's maybe an area for follow-up.
Excellent. Actually, another question on that. I think you might have addressed it a little, but it's not just calories that are needed, but high-quality protein. Does vertical farming offer opportunities for high-quality production of vegetable protein economically?
It's a great question. I don't actually think we have a global protein shortage, at least today. We have lots of protein source options for us. So we're at plenty. We're not really focused on plant proteins per se. That said, we do have sort of a skunkworks effort around looking at making therapeutic compounds, including small molecule and small protein products, but not for food, for healthcare applications. But on the plant protein side, I think we're pretty well served. On the indoor side, as I said in my presentation, I think that's going to be more a target for fermentation and cultivation than vertical farming.
Thank you. We have a local question here, so it'll be a challenge, but we're also very interested in hearing certainly your perspective on our operations here in the islands. But this is more cultural in focus. What role do Native Hawaiians and their culture, which was deeply rooted in innovative and island-specific agriculture, aquaculture, I mean, does that play a role? Is that an important role in the future of food production here? So I'll start with you again, Dr. Slaughter. I mean, in terms of, or we could even talk about farming communities. I mean, their own histories, but Hawaii being what it is and with its indigenous culture, do you feel that can be tapped as an asset? Is it something that is that you can see being incorporated into these advancing technologies?
I think that we share the same problems. We want to have an infinite timeline, and we have issues with environmental sustainability and economic sustainability, and so I think the technology is a little independent of exactly what the crop is or the cultural perspective. So I think it's an equal opportunity. The challenge, of course, will be market size. So, and when Plenty talked about focus, if you're focused on high-value crops, then that could be a challenge. So that might be a place where the government could come in and help drive adoption. So some of these, we had some technology that we were developing for sensing fruit quality as non-destructive sensing. And we had talked to a couple of manufacturers, and the driver that prevented that was how many units would you sell, right? So volume of sales is an issue. So that might be a good place where the policy could help overcome, if you have a small market and you need to develop a particular version of a technology that would be applicable to a particular crop or a cultural aspect, that might be very helpful. But aside from that, I don't really see a reason why there would be a disadvantage or a preferential advantage of a technology from one system to another.
Sure, a tool is a tool in anyone's hands, for sure. And I know that Hawaii does a lot in terms of, and increasing, for example, value-added production, things that are native and specific. The Mana Up product accelerator, if you're not aware of it, is fostering local companies doing things with local crops, but more higher value things. So, I mean, that's certainly one opportunity. Dr. Koo, surely in your international experience, I wouldn't call it resistance, but certainly unfamiliarity or reasonable distrust of technology might be kind of a barrier to adoption of technology. Can you speak a little bit to that, or your thoughts on, you did say, Hawaii could be a great place for this, but we need to be conscientious of the Native Hawaiian and indigenous culture and their agricultural expertise. So how would you describe or recommend navigating those waters?
So I think you can do both at the same time. It's not an either or choice. I support a company that works in Kenya and South Africa that uses indigenous knowledge as part of its AI program to do weather forecasting and drought forecasting for farmers. So I think there are ways to integrate local knowledge and traditional knowledge into the technology as you use it going forward, which, they've got more than 20,000 subscribers to their forecast. I'd say in general, especially of farmers, because their livelihood is dependent upon the land and the crop, they're often very resistant to something they aren't sure that it's going to work very well, right? And which is why the demo sites work very well when working with farmers. The only exception to that, and I think it's come quickly and recently, is climate change, because their traditional practices suddenly are not working when the rains don't come on time, or where there's an extended drought, or where there's a new plague of some insect or fungus, et cetera. And so I think technologists can seize the opportunity in times of crisis to help farmers in ways that maybe they wouldn't have seen before. I think to the point on the question, though, sometimes we have to be careful not to automatically jump in the technology boat when there are traditional practices that work and are suitably address the needs locally. And sometimes maybe you can use AI or other things to kind of blend things together. But we should be careful unless it's environmentally unsustainable to not abandon traditional agricultural practices.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Ryan, I wanted to add something here as well to being Indigenous Māori. Look, this is a hot button issue, in my opinion, around also firstly making sure the community is engaged. So if we're going to ask questions like this, I don't actually think it's appropriate for any of us to be commenting on Hawaiian Indigenous rights in relation to their practices, unless we're actually intimately involved in those communities. But what I will say, being intimately involved in the Māori community, is that community engagement comes first. And then second, it's really important that community knowledge from Indigenous sources is not being appropriated by corporate interests without the engagement and participation of the native people, which has happened extensively in the past. And it's just another form of colonization. And in the 21st century, I think we're past that.
Thank you. Thank you, and I certainly appreciate the care in answering, and community engagement is important, and I think Hawaii has been also seeing a renaissance in traditional agricultural practices, whether it's kalo farming or aquaculture, so thank you for your thoughts on that. I have a question for Shu specifically. I think you might have answered specifically.
Ryan.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I have to draw it to a close, and I think that last question was the perfect wrap-up.
You are correct.
Let's give a big applause for this fascinating conversation.